guys for being here.
Thanks,
and
Heidi.
for letting me join you. Let's start off talking a little bit about the origin story of the book. I love the fact that, Hana, you emailed Liz and said, I'm either having a midlife crisis or I have an idea for a documentary.
Yeah.
And then you guys took it from there.
Yeah, so this project really started with a midlife crisis, and I will add a little more color to that. It started in spin class. I had recently turned 40 and was just kind of mulling over where I was in my career and in my life and in my parenting and in my marriage, and just felt stuck and felt like things were harder than I had anticipated them being. And I thought back to, because as you do in spin class, you have time, and I was thinking back to college and remembering that the friends that I had in college always seemed really ambitious. And I thought if I could just talk to them, I wonder, we'd fallen out of touch, it'd been a long time, and I wondered what had happened to a lot of those women, and if they were feeling what I was feeling, or if it was just this my own thing that I couldn't get out of my own way and make it happen. And so I reached out to Liz and emailed her and said I might be having a midlife crisis or working on an idea for a documentary. And at the time, Liz and I were we had been in touch since college, but kind of, we were the sort of friends who have 43 emails about getting together for drinks and then see each other once. So we were on that cycle, but I also through that just knew kind of where you were in your life and had a hunch that you might be having some of the same thoughts that I was, and so we got together for drinks and decided to start reaching out to some of the women that we'd known in college, and those initial conversations were just so interesting and so compelling that we just wanted to keep going and keep talking to people, and that was really the start of the project.
Anything you want to add?
No, I thought that was good.
Okay. And in contrast to some of the dinners you write about having had with friends over the years, sort of since college and to where you were at that moment, the dinners would sort of be like bullet highlights, and you'd leave thinking, everybody's doing great. Everybody's actually juggling everything just right. Maybe this is just me. And then when you started these interviews, that was sort of not the case, right? A lot of people were feeling like, this is harder than I expected it to be. This isn't what I thought it was going to look like.
Yeah, so when we started, we really kind of approached these interviews thinking, what are we doing wrong? Where have our careers sort of fizzled a little bit? And we started each interview by asking each subject, when you got to college, what was your dream? How did that turn out? And we initially thought we were going to get some answers to some questions that were plaguing us internally, and that we were going to find out what we were doing wrong, and then look at those women who maybe were doing it right and kind of repivot. And what we found out instead was that we heard a lot of stories that were very similar to our own, of women who were mostly content in their lives and happy with the decisions that they had made. However, we're kind of struggling to get it all done every day, and that really resonated for us. And so these became stories about women's ambition trajectories through the lens of their careers, their marriages if they were married, their children if they were parents, and how they got through every day.
And you guys write about how for men through generations, there have been models of how to approach these exact things, work, family, the path to building a life. For women, not so much, at least not in a way that this generation would, not a template that this generation would necessarily adopt. The choices that were presented to, the women you went to college with, the decision, the outcome of the decisions that the women made, who you were in college with, very different than a generation ago, certainly extremely different from 2 generations ago, right? So it was a different situation than men at the same age found themselves in, where they sort of could watch how it had been done all along.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were at an event earlier today where a man came up to us afterwards who said he had a sister. He was a recent college graduate and said that his sister was in college and was already thinking about what major would be right for her if she wanted to have a family. And was that something that we had thought about? And we were like, no. That wasn't just a thing, because there was so much not a template for us when we were in college that it wasn't even really a conversation. Like, I think we looked at the previous generation and thought, like, I don't think it's going to look like that, but I don't really know what my life is going to look like. And as actually one person who we quote in the book said, like everybody else, I just thought I would have kids and it would just, I'd come out the other side and it would somehow work out. And then you get to the other side and you're like, how did I think that was going to work? I think that we lacked a template, but almost didn't recognize that we lacked a template. Like, just sort of thought, I guess we'll just figure it out. And it wasn't really until we started really doing this research and writing this book that we thought, well, you know what, men don't have to struggle with this because men have other models of how to do this. And granted, that model is changing and there are more options opening up for men too, but the way that women have to make these choices is so varied and so different, and the way that those decisions play out for us and for even, for the next generation and the next generation already are different than the way those choices played out for a generation earlier. So that was, I think, one of the big drivers for doing this research was just show me, and this is probably, I'm partially like, just tell me what to do and I'll do the things. But I don't know what the things are. So this research really was partially just like, what are the things?
Yeah, maybe I'll ask my peers and they'll tell me the things.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the things I thought was super interesting in the marriage chapter, you said that one of the keys to sustaining a superstar career is to partner with someone who has less career ambition than you. So talk about that for a minute.
So one of the things that we learned from the women, our friends that we interviewed, was something that echoed what Sheryl Sandberg said in a 2013 business address, which was the most important career decision a woman makes is whom she chooses to marry. And not everybody in our friend group was married or partnered, but those who did, we saw that those who married or partnered with people who prioritized our friends' careers equally to or higher than their own, that those friends saw greater traditional career success. Not all of them necessarily wanted high career success, but those who did, and either inadvertently or very consciously chose partners who prioritized their careers equally to or over their own, did turn out to be more successful by traditional standards. And what we saw was that what a supportive spouse looks like was not kind of what you see on TV, like, oh, honey, go get him, good luck at that board meeting today, but a spouse or a partner who will let their own career, and be happy to do so, or willing to do so, let their own career take the back seat to yours in some way, and might say, oh, you have a 7 o'clock meeting with the CEO, I will cancel all my morning meetings and take the kids to school. Or you need to go on a business trip. I was going to take a business trip that same day. I will contact my employer and ask if they can move the business trip because your business trip is also important and maybe more important than mine.
I think a couple natural questions that pop into people's mind when they hear that, like, one, you sort of can't completely control who you fall in love with.
How do you get a spouse to do that?
Well, not even that, but but two, how do you, in the moment when you're falling in love and partnering with someone, project, whether this person is the type who will say, I'll cancel my board meeting so you can go to yours. So an answer to that, I think, is when you guys talk about partnering with someone who has at least an ideological commitment to equality, right? And so what does that mean?
Yeah, so there is this great quote, not something we wrote, something we quoted from somebody in the book, an essay, this woman said that you should marry somebody who has an ideological commitment to feminism. And what we saw in our friends' marriages is that actually doesn't look like they have, read a lot of early feminist literature, which is fine, and we support that. However, it looks like somebody who takes you seriously. So even though, early on in our relationship, we did an event where one woman said, like, I'm dating somebody, and how do I know if he'll support me? Which I really wanted to be like, well, here's the, answer these 10 questions, and then you'll know.
The list, the things.
Yeah. But it's being taken seriously as a person, I think, and that we tended to see in people's relationships that it was it's not only focused on career, it's focused on the whole thing. So. Couples who checked in with each other frequently about how tasks were divided in the household. Couples who didn't just assume, like, well, because you're the woman, you're going to do this, and because I'm the man, I'm going to do this. But that sort of everything was up for discussion. That said, it's really interesting to see how much that gender divide keeps, or that those ingrained gender breakdowns keep coming back. And we saw that a lot of our friends had to bring it up again and again and have the conversation and say, you know what, I'm noticing that like more stuff is falling on my plate, and let's have a conversation about it. And we can talk more about that maybe, but so that it falls on both partners. It's not just like you have to go out there and find somebody who is magically supportive. It's a two-way street.
And also that those conversations can evolve over the years. Like, you might fall in love with somebody. Actually, a lot of our friends married their college sweetheart. That sounds like I'm 75 years old. Their college sweetheart, but they did, and they might not have necessarily started out as ideological feminist equals, and some of them, 10 years into being married, said, hey, the wife and the heterosexual relationship said, this isn't really working for me. I'm doing all these things, and you're kind of sitting on the couch and watching TV. Just as one example, and we need to switch this up today. So here's a list of things that we need to divide up more evenly, and that conversations can happen regularly and frequently, and that's a healthy part of negotiating tasks and roles.
Right. And you write about how the women who found sort of a successful formula not just were really good at picking a partner, but also were good at presenting their own career goals, their own, in general, wants and needs as something to be taken seriously and something worth valuing. And that can be a hard thing to do, but it sounds like it's an important thing to do, to present, here are the things I want, and I'm presenting them because I expect you to hear them and take them seriously, as I would yours.
Right. Well, and I think part of that also is to ask for things.
Right.
So we had one person who we interviewed who is a pediatrician, and she works part-time, and she is married to somebody who works full-time but from home, and she talked about how, and she was a former athlete in college, so working out and being athletic was things that were really important to her, and she talked about how basically every single other person in her family managed to get exercise, including her husband.
And including her dog, which she would be responsible for running.
Yes. except for her. Like, she could not find a way to put it into her day. And we were thinking, but your husband works from home. Like, surely you can figure out a way to make it work for you, because like, we know how important that is to you. You know, may not be as important for other people. But she felt like she couldn't reason with him. So, you know, and especially as women, we tend to just take on a lot of stuff. And just say, like, this is, you know, put our own needs second. And I think she felt like she was running the family, and he really liked his job, and he really needed to work out, and you know, she did too, but she didn't want to bring it up. So,
did you find yourselves giving advice during the interviews? Would you kind of interject and be like, well, have you tried? Or did you back off and just let people, not back off has a, that sounds loaded. I mean, did you just record objectively, or did you jump in?
We did not interject with advice, although we did have some people. So we interviewed almost like 75% of the people in the book. We interviewed 2 or more times, sometimes 3 or 4, over a period of 4 years, and went back to them, some as recently as this past summer, not for the book, but for other things. And we would hear from them, some of them that said that they made conscious changes in their marriages, their work lives, their parenting, their leisure pursuits, after having these conversations with us, and thinking that they did have a voice and agency in what they and how they wanted to spend their time and what they chose to pursue. So sometimes we let it sit, and then there were other people who were like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, and we were like, well, we think you should run for Congress from Virginia.
Yeah.
One woman from Virginia. So we think everybody in the book should run for Congress. So we did come up with a lot of next careers for people in our minds.
I think that's such an interesting and even instructive piece, because I mean, most of us in this room aren't going to have friends from college call us up and say, I want to interview you for my book, but we can use this as a nudge to have an honest conversation over dinner rather than sticking to the bullet points, or start talking about these things in the circles that we have in our life, because once you start talking about them out loud, you marinate in them a little bit, you digest them a little bit and start thinking, maybe it's on me to make a change here, or maybe I'm not as okay with this as I pretend I am. And so just talking about it is kind of a big step, right?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. As we started these interviews, the first maybe 4 or 5 people that we interviewed, they all cried in the interview. And for a while we were keeping like a running score of like, is this person gonna cry? And we wondered a lot about that. And we also had one woman who emailed us, and it might have been more than one, but one woman in particular who emailed us after and said, you know, this is like therapy talking to you guys, and I had to like take the rest of the day off and decompress after we spoke. And we realized that a lot of these women, we don't get asked how we are, like really how we are, and just the freedom to talk for an hour about what you thought you were going to be doing and what you are doing, and sort of reflect on where you are and where you want to be. And we're so busy with our lives and with running everybody else's life and making sure every single day that everybody else is happy, that you just don't get asked, especially, you know, and that's partially why we wrote about those dinners too, where we would get together with our college friends, and you get like, you know, 3 minutes to give bullet points on how your life is, and you're not going to be like, and also I'm just not really sure if, you know, what the meaning of life is. You know, it's not really the appropriate moment at those dinners.
My husband works out and I don't. Can we talk about that?
Yeah. So I think it was really valuable for women to just give voice to and have the time and the space to really think about these things. And we were so lucky to have this community that we could go to and ask these questions, and it's something that we think is really valuable for women in general, to be able to really take the time, and it's so hard, but to do it, to take the time to talk about the real things that are going on in your life.
In the chapter about economics, first of all, you talk about how women tend to not talk about money with each other all that often, but you got them talking about money for the purpose of the book. And one interesting takeaway was that you said that the women fell into two separate groups. One group who vowed to never depend on their partner's salary, and then one group who really didn't view earning their own paycheck as a necessity for stability or security. So what was your takeaway from that breakdown or that difference?
Well, you know, it was funny. We didn't see any markers that led up to that. We had friends who had parents who were divorced and had single moms who worked, who were like, oh, I will never be dependent on somebody else. And we had friends whose parents were divorced and who were absolutely fine getting married and being a stay-at-home mom part-time, or at being a lesser earner, and that there was not a direct corollary, and we actually couldn't find that, but we did find that every woman that we asked about this had including ourselves asking each other, had a visceral response to how they felt about money and income, not always linked, yes, to how they were raised and their parents and their relationships with money, but not a straight through line. And it was interesting that some really considered earning their own paycheck their link to stability, and others did not, which was really interesting and telling.
And it was this really visceral thing too, that like either you knew which group you were in, there was no going back and forth between it, and in some cases some women did point to a specific event. We had one woman who said, my parents split up, I saw that my mother couldn't support herself, and I knew that I never wanted that to happen for me. And other women, as you said, who came from the same situation, and their response was, I want to have a stable family, and I want to find somebody who will provide the stability for me.
In the parenting chapter, you write a lot about the emotional labor, right, that tends to fall to moms if it's a heterosexual partnership. You also talk about the feeling that moms have, that came up over and over, of I'm not sure I'm doing this as well as other moms. Do you think parenting is the area of all the areas that you looked at for this book that we measure ourselves against each other and judge ourselves the harshest within?
I think it is one of, maybe the highest. It's hard to hierarchize those things because I think we also judge each other based on our work status and our success status and what our lives look like on social media, and who's in a happy marriage or who's not, or who's got a more stable personal life. But there is something about competitive parenting, and lots of our friends talked about that really gets women in it with each other and against each other. And we had one friend who said, she works full time but identified as a flex lifer, one of our 3 groups that we talk about in the book, and she said, I look at these stay-at-home moms and I just always assume that they're doing it better than me, that they've got it all figured out, and I feel like I'm failing. I look at all these moms at drop off, and and we said to her, there are probably a million moms who are thinking that about you, and, wishing they had a flexible work-life schedule, or wishing they could go back to work and they haven't gone back to work yet, or, and we had another friend who worked on Wall Street and then was in graduate school and then had a third child and opted out, and has a husband who works in finance who said, nobody in my circle feels like they have made the perfect choice. The stay-at-home moms all envy the women who get on, she lives in Long Island, envy New York, envy the women who get on the train and go into the city every day for work, and the women who get on the train feel resentful that they have to leave their kids behind, and sad that they're not, home making lunch or whatever. Lunch is a big thing in our book, as you know. So, yes, but because parenting has become a all-encompassing sort of 24/7 competitive sport, I do think that's an easy one to consider a comparison marker. And because women get judged for everything and by everyone, and you're judged if you spend too much time hovering over your kids and you're a helicopter mom, and you get judged if you don't spend enough time with your kids and you're off at work too much and you aren't showing up at any school events, so you really can't win. So I think that is an easy one to say, wow, I just suck in every way. And we're here to say you don't. Actually, everything you're doing is just fine. That, which was an alt title for our book, but our publisher was like, no.
Yeah.
Right?
Just two things. So I think one of those women also told this great story about the volleyball mom.
Yeah.
How she has her daughter's on the volleyball team, and one of the other mothers on the volleyball team just said, "Oh, I'm just gonna have the whole team over for a sleepover tonight. Is that okay?" And she was like, "How did this woman just tonight at the drop of a hat, she can just have 10 girls sleep over?" And then her daughter came home and she'd made a craft. And it wasn't a crappy craft. It was like a really thoughtful, beautifully constructed craft that they'd followed a template, and it was the whole volleyball team or whatever. And so as she told the story, we were just like, oh yeah, we have all been there of the competitive thing of I could never do that. On the flip side, the women who didn't let that get to them were able to achieve more in their careers. For the most part, the women who had these more traditionally successful careers said, this is what I can give, this is what I can do. We had one friend who said that she hosts, she tells her kids at the beginning of the school year, I can do one school event, pick one. And that's it. She doesn't feel guilt about it. Everybody's expectations are set. And she's not sitting there thinking, oh, the other mothers think that I'm terrible because I only do one event and I went to the Christmas show and I didn't go to the spring pageant. But in segmenting that out, she has so much more space to think about her career.
Yeah, it's a very good model. And not just what I can handle and can do, but what I actually enjoy doing and actually want to be there for, and giving yourself permission to have that be your where you set the bar, right?
Yes, well, and that's a big thing that we talk about, is dividing things and dividing responsibilities according not just to gender or who happens to be in the house at the time, but according to joy, pre-Marie Kondo. I have to say we wrote this before
Not
that.
Sparking
what
joy,
sparks
just
joy in
yeah.
your tasks? Yeah. But dividing things up according to who likes to do stuff. Some people, I hate washing, I hate making dinner, but I'm totally happy to wash dishes. So, people who, I also will say that I hate we have First Friday at school where you're required by other mothers to go and see what just sit there for 20 minutes and watch your child in school when you could be doing other things. So I don't like to do that. But other people, and I know our kids weirdly are in the same class this year. But for people who really love that and like to feel like they're a part of the school, and so dividing things up according to the things that you're good at and that you want to do, as opposed to this pile of stuff just got dumped on you.
Also, I learned this week that helicopter parenting has been replaced by fighter pilot parenting. That's the new That's the new
Interesting.
label we should all either aspire to or avoid. I'm not sure which, although it sounds fatal, so I'm gonna probably try to avoid it myself.
What does that mean exactly?
I mean, I think it means you like mow down your kids'
Okay.
competitors,
Okay.
right? What else would it mean?
Yeah, I was thinking, that you're going in for a kill.
Right. You're not
Okay.
just like hovering while they fill out the college application. You're actually
Just like
taking out the other kids who would apply.
Right.
I think that's my interpretation.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
Interesting.
I'll wait for someone to write a book about it, and then I'll interview them. So we were talking before we came on stage about how this book really resonates with, of course, the age group of the women that you interviewed, but really also people much younger and much older too, because career decisions and parenting decisions and taking care of family certainly can look like taking care of aging parents. It can look like taking care of your grandkids. It can look all sorts of ways. And so really these conversations and questions are resonating with all sorts of people, aren't they? Not just sort of this age and not just women. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we, at numerous events we have seen a wide age range of attendees, from people in college to mostly women in their 60s and over. And a lot of them have come up to us and said, this really resonates for me. A lot of older women have told us, we wish we had something like this when we were growing up and making these decisions for ourselves, and we had so many fewer choices, and the template, as we've talked about, we think looks different than it does today, and that it will in 20 years. And we've had a lot of younger people come to us and say, I'm thinking about these things now, and I appreciate kind of having a checklist in a way, as we were talking about, whether it's partner choice or what do you want your career to look like? Do you want to have as one of our friends said, a balls to the wall career, or do you want to have more of a life that is like another woman who stepped off the corporate track, the corporate CEO track, to live in Boulder, learn fly fishing, and volunteer at a dog shelter, and still works full time, and does not have children, but is prioritizing things outside of work. And in our last chapter called Change, we interviewed a lot of our friends, again, for a fourth time, and learned that a lot of them in their early to mid 40s were going through some pretty big life changes, and that we think, unlike a generation ago, 40 was not, was it When Harry Met Sally? 40 is not some dead end staring at me, with gray hair, but that 40 was a time that a lot of these women really experienced a renaissance in their lives, in their personal lives. Two of our friends got married for the first time in their mid 40s. Several got separated or divorced and embarked on new relationships or didn't. Some changed careers altogether. A successful screenwriter who said she would love to direct, but that directing really didn't fit her lifestyle because she had two small children, aged 3 and 6. 8 months later, we interviewed her again, and she was directing her first Hollywood big budget picture because the opportunity had come up, and she rearranged her life, chaos that it created and all, to make this work, because it was something that she had really dreamt of doing but really had never allowed herself to entertain before. And basically at that point she was 43 or 44 and was like, F it, I deserve this and I really want this and I will make this happen for myself. So we saw a lot of women embracing change, a lot of women who have been stay-at-home parents, going back to work, pursuing new careers, hobbies, different configurations of ways to make money or make, leisure into money. So yeah, a lot of changes, not just in the age group that we interviewed.
Yeah, and I said this earlier to you guys as well, but I think back all the time to a talk that I heard with Anne Marie Slaughter, where she talked about how Hillary Clinton, whatever your feelings are about her politically, for sure launched her entire political career after Chelsea left for college. So really launched her kid, sort of checked off, not that you're done parenting when your kid goes to college, but the hands-on, real busy work of it has changed anyway. Then she ran for Senate twice. Then she ran for president twice. Then she was Secretary of State, all after her kid went to college. So, the idea that career is this question that we're hashing out in our 20s and then never again is just not, I don't know if it was ever accurate, but it's certainly not now.
Well, and it's so freeing to think about it that way too, to be like, oh, actually, I don't have to do everything right now. We were just saying, when I'm 70, I want to run for Congress. Just kidding. But the idea that you have so much more of your career to play with and so much more of your life to play with, and it doesn't all have to be done all at the exact same minute, is really eye-opening.
One of the things the book does such a nice job of is reminding the reader that there's stuff that you couldn't possibly plan for in college, right? I mean, a terminal illness might come up, but all sorts of life-changing moments that you don't take any classes for. There aren't really scenarios that you've given a lot of thought to, and that stuff does affect ambition, or is affected by ambition. It does affect family. It does affect career. So. I guess talk about that a little bit. I mean, I found that very refreshing when that would come up in the book. It just made it seem like, okay, these are, I mean, not that you forget they're humans, but it's like, okay, they're very human, having very human moments.
Yeah, well, and we had a few friends who were dealing with either children who had special needs or ongoing conditions. And what was interesting is that it affected them in very different ways. So there were some women who felt very strongly that they needed to be there and be very hands-on to be the caregiver. So we had one woman who talked about how she had tried every possible configuration to continue working while also managing her child's condition, but she also had a spouse who traveled constantly and just didn't feel like she could make all of the pieces fit. And so over the course of interviewing her over 3 years, she was working full-time, she was job sharing, she was working part-time, she was working from home. She worked out an arrangement where she took the summers, they gave her the summers off, which is like, I've never even heard of somebody negotiating that, which shows like how valued she was, all with the same company. And could not manage to make it work. And the last time that we talked to her, she was staying at home and just said she felt like things were calmer. And this actually goes back to the conversation of the role that her husband played because he traveled so much. She said she felt like she was the parent and he was the high-fiver. That he would come home from a business trip and say, like, how we doing? And she would say, oh, we're tapering with the medication, and just like give him updates like he was, some random person in the hallway. And we said to her, would you consider, what if he had a job where he didn't travel so much? And then maybe you could work. And she said, I could never ask him to do that. He loves his job. And she loved her job too, but she felt like she needed to be the primary caretaker. And that was common. There were another woman actually who had made a similar decision. On the other hand, one woman that we interviewed who fell into our high achiever category, who has a child with an ongoing condition, said, some people who have this, they make it their life, and it's a part of my life, but it's not all of my life. And she in fact, really stepped up her job and is one of the people in the book who we talk about how sometimes ambition shifts between the partners. And her husband had been sort of the more high-achieving person in the family, and at some point she said, you know what, I really want to go for the big job, and they moved for her job, and both parents work full-time, even though, and they have a child with a condition, and she just felt like that was what worked for her, was to have a lot of other pieces of her life as well. So it's interesting to see the different ways that people manage that. And then we also, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I don't know if you're thinking of the same story that I am, but there's a woman who is not in the book who was in medical school with us, an undergraduate, and then in medical school at Northwestern, and was diagnosed with MS while she was an undergrad, and basically finished medical school in a wheelchair, and she has not been able to walk since she was basically 21 years old, and continues not only being a high achiever, but she is a associate professor of medicine at a college and is a rehabilitation physician, and she does all of her rounds in a wheelchair. And she joked with us that she tells her patients walking is overrated, and she also tells us that she sort of had a desire to have a child, and her husband really wanted to have a child, but they chose not to because she would not and could not and had no desire to give up working, and didn't feel like she could do both and manage her own health condition. So that was somebody who made a compromise that was hard for her, but one that we don't think she regrets, and is very successful today.
Why didn't you put her in the book?
A lot of side stories, but mostly that her takeaway didn't have a through line that made sense in the chapter organization that we had. Yeah.
So at the end, you talk about how a lot of the women formed almost a community after being reconnected through you. They and you get together now, right? And meet up and stay in touch. And so do you think that's a product of feeling, like we're all feeling the same sorts of pressures and the same sorts of internal angst, or do you think it was just a convenience thing, like, oh, now I know how to get in touch with so-and-so because Hana told me how?
I think in part, reconnecting with people in your 40s is awesome. You get, when you're in college, there's just so much other stuff going on, and you sort of have your group of friends, and we're just, we spent time walking around the campus while we were here, and we haven't been back in a while, and so we were sort of just remembering what it's really like to just be in it and be in college. And and it happened that it was midnight, so we were walking around and being like, why is the campus so quiet? And then almost got run over by a golf cart that said Kappa on it, which was just a reminder that, like, oh, right, there's like so much other stuff going on in college. It's not like classes. So I think in part you're so busy with that, and then to be able to reconnect as adults, free from like all of the judgment and crazy stuff that's going on in college, is just wonderful and needed. Sort of as we were talking about before, this idea that people don't really ask how you are, and that once you get to be in your 40s, just a lot of the other stuff falls away, and you can just have open and honest conversations. So I think in part it's just it's been great to see how supportive everybody is in like sharing their stories, even as we've been on this journey of promoting this book, and we post on Facebook, and people are, just lovely and supportive, and nobody's, posting and being like, I hate you guys because you wrote a book or whatever might,
Right. And I also think I think there's something that is very meaningful and poignant and feels good about reconnecting with people who knew you when you were 18 and met you the first week of school. There are people I've known in the audience tonight since 1989 who saw me doing beer bongs, and here we are today. And that, yes, that a lot of that.
Raise your hands if you saw her do a beer bomb.
Stuff of, oh my God, there's like more than 3. God. That a lot of, yes, the things, I think the insecurities that plagued me, certainly in college and my 20s, now that I'm in my mid-40s, and really kind of wanting to, in a good way, just cut to the quick with people and really get to the really, really. And that feels really good to do with people who have known you for so long and have seen you evolve is meaningful, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, last question, and then we're going to go to audience Q&A. Is there one takeaway that each of you could share from the book that you now have applied to your own life? You didn't know this approach, you didn't know this discussion point, and now you do.
So one of the things that we found in the book is that there are these 3 trajectories, and that women move across them over the course of their careers: high achiever, opt-outer, and flex lifer. And for me, that was so eye-opening to see that you can choose how leaned into your career you want to be and how leaned into parenting you want to be at any given moment. And it's not like you pick one thing and that's just it for forever.
It's not fixed.
Yes,
Yeah.
that you can say, like, you know what, this year I just feel like I need to be around more. And 6 months from now, I might feel totally fine, you know, traveling all the time or just working harder, and that you have a long time to play with and many different lives that you can live over that period of time.
I love that.
And for me, there are multiple things, but the one that is coming to mind right now is that the micro decisions that you make every day that you think are immutable are actually not at all. And one example of that, this just sounds so trivial, but it is something that was taking up a lot of time in my life. I was not washing things in the dishwasher. I was hand washing things because it's comforting. I like hand washing. It was helping a little bit with like my OCD tendencies, and it was taking so much time in a day. And I posted something on Facebook about it, and all these people were like, start loading the dishwasher. So I started loading things in the dishwasher, and suddenly I have all this new freelance work in the new year, and that's such a tiny thing, and I've been less rigid about, I need to make my kids lunches every day. I know lunches are a thing for you too, but stopping being so rigid about the things that I think I have to do, or that I have to do a certain way every day, letting go of some of those and thinking, or for people who own everything in their house, like saying, oh, actually, it is going to be okay if I let my partner load or unload the dishwasher, and they might not do it the same way that I do, and that is okay. You know, and I see myself every time, and I'm like, but the small plates go there, and the big plates go there. But I'm like, you know what? I'm actually going to let this go and go write a pitch letter to a website and then make some money publishing an article. And so changing up the way that you assume that is the only way to do things in your life. And that's how this woman directed a big budget Hollywood film, was by thinking, oh, I couldn't possibly direct, and then by thinking, I couldn't possibly not do this. It's too great of an opportunity. I must do it.
It's a good trade-off.